Hello, I'm Robert Liu, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this virtual ceremony honoring Professor Christoph Schreiner for his ARO Award of Merit. In this introduction, we'll try to provide a little insight into the man behind this very deserving recognition.
I'm Dan Pauly, and I would like to kick things off by first offering a bit of a historical perspective. The ARO has honored 46 pioneering researchers with their Award of Merit. Their selection of Christoph has special significance because it is the first time they have recognized a researcher who has devoted their career to studying sound processing at the level of the auditory cortex. In the BC era, that's before Christoph, the auditory cortex was not a very popular system to study cortical sensory processing and perception. Work on the auditory cortex has always been dwarfed by studies of visual cortex, but even compared to the somatosensory cortex, auditory cortex publications lag behind. But somewhere in the late 80s and early 90s, productivity really started to ramp up as the auditory cortex became a premier system for research on neural coding and adult experience-dependent plasticity. Looking within the auditory system at keyword hits among ARO abstracts, we see a similar story. Now, the online archives didn't allow me to dig back into the BC era, but even looking over the past 30 years, one can appreciate that the appearance of auditory cortex as a keyword has tripled relative to the other major stations for neural sound processing, which are pooled together here in gray. Now, to what can we attribute this marked uptick in auditory cortex productivity over the last 30 years? Clearly, the answer is that it's all because of Christoph and all of the remarkable members of the Schreiner lab over the years. I'm kidding, of course, because the truth is that Christoph was one among a cadre of key principal investigators that really took up the challenge of unraveling the mysteries of how sound was encoded at the level of the auditory cortex and how these neural representations supported auditory perception, both in the context of normal and disordered hearing. But Christoph is a superb choice as the first researcher among this group to honor with the award. Put some numbers on that statement, let's pull Christoph's trading card and have a look at his stats. In terms of scholarship, Christoph has been both highly productive and impactful, with 144 publications garnering 24,481 citations and an H index of 85. Christoph is a revered teacher and mentor, having supervised 20 PhD students and 35 postdoctoral trainees over the years, and has been an active member of the academic community, where he serves as vice chair for research in the OH&S department at UCSF, in addition to professional service for the ARO and other international organizations. Christoph's research has been continuously supported by the NIH since 1988, and importantly, he is by no means done. He is PI on 3 large active grants and continues to develop sophisticated neurophysiological and computational approaches to understand neural processing of signals and noise and the disruption of these normal processes following sensory neural hearing loss.
How did Christoph reach this level of impact in the hearing sciences? In many ways, his whole life has been leading up to this. Christoph grew up in northern Germany, where frequent trips into the woods fostered a love for nature. His favorite subject in school was biology, but when he selected a professional field for training, his other passion for more quantitative and physical sciences steered him into studying physics at the University of Göttingen in 1969. He worked under the tutelage of Professor Manfred Schroeder, who is renowned for using innovative applications of math to various acoustic problems in the real world relating to speech, hearing, and concert hall acoustics. In fact, Christoph's first exposure to modulation transfer functions and auditory psychophysics came while he was completing his physics master's and doctoral theses, setting Christoph on a road to using rigorous quantitative methods in the hearing sciences. Along the way, Christoph enrolled in medical school to learn human physiology, since he became convinced that psychophysical phenomena had to be understood in the context of both the biophysics and physiology of the sensory system. In 1977, with a fresh PhD in physics in hand, Christoph embarked on actual physiological studies of the auditory system in his first postdoc at the Max Planck Institute lab of Professor Otto Creutzfeldt, an early pioneer in higher order visual neurophysiology who wanted to expand into audition. It was there while he completed a doctoral thesis in medicine, that Christoph published his first highly cited paper on the thalamocortical transformation of responses to complex auditory stimuli in 1980, a few years ahead of the coming explosion in publications on auditory cortex that Dan described.
Right. So after the completion of his training in 1980, Christoph was offered the chance to lead the auditory group at Max Planck, though he was encouraged by Professor Kortschfeld to first do a short postdoctoral stint in California before returning to Germany to take the reins. After an initial crash course in American culture at Disneyland, Christoph headed to UC San Francisco to work with Mike Merzenich and a team of researchers developing a multi-channel cochlear implant. The fellowship was a success on many levels because Christoph became friendly with Marcia Raggio, another researcher on the cochlear implant research team, and their collaboration bore fruit, both academically and personally, as we can appreciate from this photo of Krista, Marcia, and their daughter, Christina. Now, the collaboration with Mike Merzenich was also a massive success, and we all know what was envisioned as a one-year fellowship wound up as something else entirely. Merzenich and Schreiner began a 30-year collaborative partnership that in many ways defined a field, producing several canonical works on the organization of sound feature representations in the cortex, as well as the mechanisms and therapeutic applications of cortical plasticity.
If you make a word cloud of the abstracts from Christoph's greatest hits, you get a nice illustration of how comprehensively his work has impacted our understanding of the central auditory system. He has made major contributions to elucidating functional auditory cortical organization, as well as midbrain and thalamic functional organization, cortical plasticity from synapses to maps, hearing impairment effects on the cortex, and of course, complex auditory receptive fields of cortical neurons, something you'll hear more about in Christoph's lecture.
Christoph has shown an abiding belief in the virtues of collaborative research. The primary affiliation listed on all of his papers is the Coleman Lab, an endowed laboratory within the department that is the intellectual home for clinician scientists and researchers with an interest in the organization of the brain's hearing systems. In addition to the many seminal works published with Merzenich over the years, Christoph has had an enormously successful and long-standing collaboration with Steve Chung, a neurotologist in the department, with Ralph Beitel, with his right-hand man, Craig Atencio, and more recently with new faculty recruits to the Coleman Lab, Brian Malone, and Andrea Hassenstadt. Christoph's collaborations extended beyond UCSF as well. The late Jeff Weiner, who spent his career across the Bay at the University of California, Berkeley, is widely regarded as one of the great neuroanatomists of the last 50 years, who, to the great credit of our field, happened to focus his efforts on the central auditory pathways. The collaboration between Weiner and Schreiner was truly nonlinear, a 1 + 1 = 1 million kind of partnership that projected these gorgeous functional maps of sound feature representations onto the underlying lattice of neuroanatomical connections. The primary research papers are all paperweights, dense, rich, and hugely informative, but the review papers are beautifully streamlined and provide a remarkable introduction to the field because they cut through the inherent complexity and introduce clear, inspiring, and testable models that have been a source of inspiration for many of us.
And it's not just his science that has been an inspiration. Another equally important contribution Christoph has made to our field is the 12 PhD and 18 postdoc advisees over the past 25 years who have gone on to become faculty. Christoph has seeded multiple generations of auditory scientists in the Academy through his thoughtful mentorship and unique blend of German seriousness and humor. Dan and I were both at UCSF in the early 2000s, along with this cohort of Coleman Lab colleagues and future professors, which includes the so-called Three Musketeers who implemented the dynamic moving ripple stimuli you'll hear Christoph talk about. Christoph has always been generous with his time, and you could walk into his office and he would be willing to put away whatever administrative work had been heaped on him to listen intently to you talk about your science and offer his advice, sometimes playfully. And for many of us, Christoph continues to offer words of wisdom to put things into perspective, always with the long view on your scientific contributions and your life and family. Had we been able to celebrate his award in person, I'm sure we'd all be going out to a Coleman Lab alum dinner, which Christoph loves to host whenever we see each other at meetings. We'll take a rain check and look forward to toasting him in person next time. We all could not be happier to see Christoph receive this well-deserved recognition. Congratulations, Christoph.
Christoph.